And I'm taping this for those who will be the latecomers. All right, the story of Thoreau goes back to the ancient times. According to the manuscript that Plato left us, and he is considered a fairly straight-up, honest guy, did not write a lot of fiction. He was reporting on the history of an event 650 years before him, and I think he was like 600 BC, wherein this giant continent off the shores of Europe sank and took with it the original and primordial human culture. Now, he was reporting this in a manuscript we found later, but in this reporting he states there was a technology, a science, a medicine, a form of culture, a body of mathematical knowledge that was disseminated throughout the world from this great culture center known as Atlantis. And we know from other sources besides Plato that the ancient mysteries, quote unquote, the mystery schools, the different spiritual worship centers dotted around Europe and Middle East and North Africa, all claimed relation to a prior civilization. So with this in mind, we look back through time and we think, what was it they were all practicing together, and how did they understand it? What they were practicing was astrology, emanating from the culture center of Babylon, that was linked to the ancient alphabet of Phoenician, which eventually became Hebrew, and the natural number cycle of the time counting that the Babylonian astrologers had invented. So from this ancient time that we hear about in mythic time as Atlantis, we get a body of astrological, mathematical, linguistic, and medical correspondences, where the original culture has died, but we have inherited these correspondences. And these are what the ancient mystery schools were teaching, passing down, and practicing. Okay? Thoreau comes late in the history, but the bedrock, the bone structure, the cultural foundation comes from this ancient original civilization, or at least this last remnant of our prehistory, however you want to mythologize that. We have absolutely no physical evidence beyond underwater fortifications that go out to sea miles and broken up underwater islands, which are still attempting to be mapped. So we can't say Atlantis yes or no, but we can say we have a document from Plato about the oral history that has been preserved and about this culture and the teachings that it sent forward. So we have a mythological root that became historical, or that entered the historical world, that we can trace in text and documents from about 600 BC forward. And we call that time period, 600 BC to 200 AD, as the Alexandrian period. If you were to go to the library and try and look up what were the people doing and how would I find the major mystery centers or the major cultures of Western civilization, they would all be clustered as the Alexandrian civilization or Alexandrian culture. It's named after Alexander the Great, who conquered the whole territory and instituted a common language about 200 BC. So this original alphabet that was Phoenician became Hebrew, that came forward from this ancient time, was hung on the constellations, the literal letters that they were writing in Babylon, the whole Phoenician expanded culture, which means coming from Iran and Iraq and that little neck of the woods down there that we now think of as, this political hotspot in this oil realm. This is the biblical Eden. And this is the culture from which astrology came, and it was hooked to this ancient alphabet. You will see on every one of these tarot cards, I make a big thing about this alphabet because they all are connected through the Hebrew letters. What makes them esoteric tarot cards is the fact that they have Hebrew letters, they have number correspondences, they have fixed and stable arcana. Number 1 is the Magus, number 2 is the High Priestess, number 3, etc. through the circuit. And they have astrological correspondences that connect between the letters and the numbers and the arcana and the signs and planets. So when it sounds like I'm leaping out of deep space to talk to you about ancient history and Plato and remnants of ancient cultures, but we have this testimony from ancient times hooked to this astrological alphabet. And it connects to a whole wisdom tradition that had branches all around the Mediterranean that sprung up not independently because they're all related by this great language pool. Actually, Phoenician became Hebrew, became through a process of assimilation Greek, which then became Latin. So all of our Western languages, except the Celtic ones, are Hebrew-based. So this is truly, although the culture of the Middle East is considered Oriental by strict historians, the root of Western civilization is from this incredibly loaded place that we now call the oil nations. Okay, and they did take it around a lot of places because the Phoenicians were seafarers. So and you see all the related languages all up and down the coastline of Europe and around the northern side of Africa. There's all these linguistic links and stuff too. So I'm not totally speculating based on just tarot imagery. There's all kinds of historical cross-pollination. And again, this is why they call it Alexandrian civilization, because there's this great circular bowl of culture around the Mediterranean where they're all cross-pollinating and they're all ripping off this baseline of this alphabet, these astrology correspondences, these number correspondences which become Pythagorean numerology, and these arcana. Okay, so that deck there is the first in our tour. I'm going sort of spiritually chronologically, starting from here. And you will see there a representation of a purely Jewish, hence very early set of connections between the Hebrew alphabet, the named arcana, and these numbers 0 through 21. Now, the thing about this deck that is especially interesting is that we start right out with the Magus and the High Priestess as Adam and Eve. You're not going to see this formulation very often in Europe. It becomes a minority strain of the Kabbalist Christian Gnostics later on in Europe, but you only see it in one little family. Also, there's a number of other enigmatic images that show a relationship to the other oldest lineage over here with the Pythagorean cards. Now, let me see. This deck itself, El Gran Tarot Esoterico, is published by a Spanish publishing company that's been in business 600 years. This was their 600th anniversary deck, and it was constructed by one of Europe's premier tarot scholars. And she went back, and I don't know whether she did this, whether she knew she was corresponding with Hebrew scholarship or not, because she doesn't really mention it, but she puts the Hebrew letters there, and she puts the astrological correspondences just like they are in the what scholars think are the primordial correspondences, astrologically and letter-wise, which goes back 1,800 years BC to Abraham's revelation about the mythic teaching inside the Hebrew alphabet. So this is a modern scholar, R.E.A. Kaplan, who's done his homework and raveled it all the way back to the original alphabet mysticism and then translated every line of this document called the Sefer Yetzirah, which is an ancient Hebrew alphabet magic document. So, and he's, for every phrase, there's 2 or 3 pages of prose while he unpacks what's in it. So a person who was going to be interested in this esoterico tarot could do no better than to go straight to this as a way of beginning to meditate on these inner connections. But it's also very different than what we have learned to think of as European tarot. For example, you see this Empress card, who almost all the European tarots give us some kind of Venus energy on the Empress card, and here we have Mars. Pretty interesting. The Wheel of Fortune has this enigmatic image of the white bear rolling a millstone while a crowned monkey with a pinwheel sits in the tree. And this Janus face looks backwards and forwards, the past and the future. This wonderful sun card with the 3 alchemical serpents on it. One looks like blood, one looks like chlorophyll, and one looks like the black metallic fluid that the alchemists used to talk about. There's a major revelation going on in this deck corresponding to the old Kabbalist mysteries. Look at this great devil card. It's a female horned goddess with upside-down caduceus penetrating into this giant blood-red womb. And you just know she kicks ass and takes no prisoners. You know that this is about the scapegoated goddess. There's a very, very strong, not just Jewish, but Gnostic and Alexandrian flavor to this. Now we know it was published in this century, but we also know from my own homework and homework that you can do if you want, that this hooks into this ancient, aboriginal even, from the point of view of Western civilization, aboriginal strain of original gnosis. And it's very interesting because we see one of the mysteries represented here in the Grail Queen, the Queen of Cups. All the other royalty in this deck wear black. And here she is, naked under her robe with eagles at her feet. The eagles that are usually on the Empress card. The Empress has the lions that are usually on the Strength, and the Strength is a young man with a club. I mean, we're talking a different reality. But, what's that?
Venus.
Yes, yes. He's the enforcer of the Great Mother. He says nature makes sure that you find out what is the harmonious way by giving you the results of the non-harmonious way sometimes. Natural consequences, he just makes sure they happen. So anyway, that's the Hermit, yeah. Yeah, with this stag in the background is an old image you find on the Mantegna Tarot of Father Time, which is why it's also, half the time you see this really old form of it. This is not a candle, this is a hourglass. But we'll see more of that down the road anyway. So I'm just giving you this glimpse. Here's this tremendous cultural treasure trove going all the way back to this really powerful ancient lineage, and it's totally Jewish. But it's magical, Kabbalistic, Gnostic Jewish, Alexandrian lapsed Judaism, the type that the old boys in Jerusalem hated. And it's saturated with this Gnostic ideal of projecting oneself into the drama of the archetypes, going through self-initiation with the use of these archetypes and the letters and the sounds and the astrology and all the correspondences, and using them as a tool to work on your own being, so that as you internalize the cards, you internalize all the parts of nature that they're hooked up to, and you become a magus. And again, this goes right back to that old Platonic and what's the sunken island? Atlantean mythos, that we came from a time when we possessed a more refined spiritual science, and these are the remnants, and we're trying to reconstruct the model. So this is the Hebrew effort, although the Hebrews don't claim this. It was published by a Spanish tarot deck who found a gypsy woman with a reputation for gypsy tarot. And I have several of her other decks. One of them's over there. It's one of the more modern esoteric decks. Beautiful, beautiful thing. Not Hebrew at all. So she's such a wonderful scholar that she is represented in her tarot decks. 3 or 4 major branches of tarot history. I'm very proud of this woman, but I don't think she lives anymore.
Can you still buy the deck?
Yes, you can, through U.S. game systems.
They do have it, okay.
It's just they don't, they don't carry them so much because people don't ask for them. The other thing, I put forth this picture because this is to show you there's a major theory from a wonderful fellow named Stephen Franklin that the tarot was originally a game board. And actually he's got the 4 royalty on the 4 directions, and then the 12, these squares become the minor arcana. If the game board is played at like a cross like this, and the squares were to be cut up, the major arcana would live around the center and build up into a tower, kind of. And the minor arcana would come in from the 4 directions, like 4 different tribes. And they'd be struggling to make it into the center and climb the tower, which is, it's actually the Babylonian astrological tower of 7 rungs, each rung representing one of the planets. And again, we're back to that astrological model that is 1/4 of this mystery transmission.
Do you know the game Nine Men's Morris?
No, I don't.
It's a very simplified version of something like this, it was also associated with literally playing the game of 9, like Morris dancers. I don't know, in England they have Morris dancers, and it was related to this game where you try to climb this or get into this inner circle that was represented, I guess, by a hill or something. Anyway, it's sort of interesting. It was an old custom to do the Morris dance and play the 9 Men's Morris. Anyway,
wonderful. Well, see, it's certainly true. The Masonic floor comes from this. The black and white floor of the Masons' Lodge is the planetary map, and as they move through their grades, they do this very slow, long dance of you occupy this square for a while, and then next time you're in this square, and they move you through all the positions in the ritual over time. Anyway, this is all connected because all around the world, and Stephen, what's his name? I think it's Foster has written this wonderful book about the origin of the tarot in astrological grids and game boards. And he's just done a tremendous amount of linking, again, the Hebrew alphabet, the stars in the Milky Way that the letters were drawn from, the actual connections between the constellations and the letters and the arcana and the all these different correspondences that build up. He's tracing this same history that I'm talking to you about now from the primordial past through the mutations of the Hebrew alphabet into the other alphabets of Europe and the mystic beliefs and mysteries that have broken up. Now, that have been broken up into the alphabet for memorization. The art of memory is the roots of tarot, because the way an educated person could keep all the learning in the world held inside of themselves, or all the learning they could get exposed to, would be to store it in a mental map that contains enough hidey holes to put all your ideas. So if you had like a mental castle, this was a classic way of learning a science or a craft or something. You'd imagine a castle and you'd make up a use for every room and put furniture in every room and stuff. And then as you were learning to remember your subjects, each room you would dedicate to the different subjects of your craft or art, so that if you needed to revisit what you knew later or remember a recipe long before people could write it all down, they had to remember. So this art of memory comes all the way to us from all the way back. These skeletal structures of ideas that are first put forth in the mind visually, and then toured and associated with things you need to remember in the world, so that at any time you could pick up the tour and check with those ideas you hooked onto those locations in the mental map. So you can see where the connection is. The game board being astrological, connected with the 4 directions and the 4 elements. The tarot becoming the flashcards for this. The game board being an interior memory castle, and each one of these cards being one of the rooms in it. And those rooms being linked to the signs and the planets, and being linked to sacred words through the assemblage of letters that are also numbers. So then you're doing math as well as magic, as well as astrology. This is a wonderful, wonderful system that has numerous scales of value associated with it, that the more you know about it, the more you can pack meaning and intuition and spiritual ideas and practical advice in the world into these little cubby holes, because each of them is a room in your memory castle. That's what tarot is. Any deck of tarot, all decks of tarot, any symbol system is there to hang ideas on that relate and correspond. And this is how humans have lifted themselves from the paradisiacal time of no writing and no clocks and no worrying about any of that into cultural time, where we write about ourselves and do math and keep books and calculate and measure and learn astrology and, get a different grip on the world. Tarot is an artifact from that changeover, where it used to all be memorized and now we have flashcards. Okay, so this other deck that I'm showing you here, this next one, is from about the 2nd century AD. You can move that if you want to a little bit. It's called the Ibis Tarot. It's a colored amplification of several other tarot decks on the market, one of them from the Brotherhood of Light, one of them called the Saint Germain Tarot, one of them called Egyptios Kir, or Kir's Egyptian Tarot, and another one vaguely related called the Tarot of the Ages. The Tarot of the Ages is interesting because it has the same astrology as this Hebrew deck, but it has the imagery, at least on the major arcana, of an Egyptian deck. The Kir Tarot is also very interesting because they're using the numerology and correspondences of Greek rather than Hebrew. They have Hebrew letters on it, but by doing my homework I discovered that they've put the astrology in the Greek order through the alphabet. So you get the planets first. The first 10 major arcana are planets. The next 12 are signs. So you can sort of see this segue of ideas moving from culture to culture. This one, this Egyptian-style tarot, is attempting to reproduce a document that has been attributed to the scholar Pythagoras, another good professorly type who reported on his times and was considered to be a very honorable and creditable cultural resource. His work is trustworthy if it can be proved to be his. And the document that this came from, scholars have said either he dictated or one of his students dictated or took transcription from him. This was supposedly an account of his Egyptian initiation in the tunnels between the door opens between the paws of the Sphinx, and there's this tunnel system between the Sphinx and the pyramid. And I happened to have just talked to Moira Timms the other day, who goes to Egypt several times a year, and confirmed to me that they are currently excavating these very tunnels, and that there's going to be some news leak out pretty soon, which makes me incredibly excited, because there's been a lot of controversy about whether this document is true or not, since there were no pictures made. Merely a verbal description was made of some images that were seen on the inside walls of an illuminated gallery, where they were person-size bas-reliefs or friezes that were carved and then painted. And he did a 3-year tenure with the Egyptian priests in Memphis, and this was his graduation, to go into these tunnels and not be let out until he had a certain string of experiences, and one of them was identifying these images and saying what they meant. He had to recognize the symbols. He'd been studying already for 3 years, so this was to prove that he'd absorbed something. And so he names them out very conscientiously, one after the other, in the letter that they're associated with and the image, but he does not give pictures. So there has been some historical controversy about these Iamblican-style tarot, these Egyptian-looking tarot, because they are not, quote, authentic Egyptian art. They can't be. We don't have the art. However, we might have it soon, and that will be interesting to see to what degree there was a relationship between the Hebrew letters, these arcana, and this whole mystery school connection. But there's a very strong feeling. I keep running into evidence scattered all through my broader studies, and I'm involved with certain mystery schools now too, and so I have better archives available to me than I did before. But it's definitely clear that all the esoteric decks that we're talking about were aware of these arcana, because this Two Paths card is the Egyptian formulation, and it's here on this Hebrew deck too. You don't get to a version of it that looks like Romeo and Juliet until Europe. So these are both authentic Alexandrian models. One very strongly Jewish Gnostic, another spun in a slightly different direction. There are several changes in the astrology between this one and this one, and we'll find that this model is what goes down in history and comes up in the 17th century, 1700s, as the French esoteric tarot. So, but by that time it doesn't look Egyptian anymore, but it has all these correspondences. And the difference between the Hebrew one and this one is, let's see, the signs. Is this how it is? Yeah, between the star card and the emperor card are switched astrologically. And then there's another pair. Oh, the world and the magus are switched astrologically.
Aleister Crowley said, what is it, Saadi is not the star or whatever, the Hebrew letter.
Yes, that's probably why, but at that point the English, the Order of the Golden Dawn had corrupted the whole Hebrew alphabet scheme. So this that made it look like, oh, he's referring to this change that the French school made. And it is true that the English Order of the Golden Dawn came up out of the footprints of the French school. They took a lot of what they founded themselves on from the Martinist stream, but it's originally Iamblican. And anywhere where you see this Two Paths, that's one of the footprints of being informed of the Iamblican decks. The other thing that you see that's very standard for all of these decks with this signature is that they have literally the same text, that nobody adds anything or changes it around or writes anything whimsically in there. They are all copies of the same document, and they were printed, over a 200-year span, I think. And apparently Madame Blavatsky used this deck, or a copy of this deck. She had this manuscript in her possession, and it was her interpretation of Tarot. So, and her father was a heavy-duty Mason Rosicrucian occultist and had one of the best libraries in Europe, apparently, according to the occult scuttlebutt. She was very well educated and connected. I remember she's the one who went to Tibet and studied with them and then brought back all this stuff that they're only just now proving that she was not making it up, that they found some of the documents that she was teaching from. And there was all this controversy about whether she was a quack or not, and they've actually found the proofs in the Tibetan monasteries now that they had to grab all their stuff and run, right? They grabbed what they could from their libraries, and out came these wonderful things that had been buried. Okay, so really probably the Iamblican Tarot was black and white, or as the manuscript was traveling around, it was not in brilliant illustrated color. And that's helpful because you can concentrate more on the codes when you are learning it as a scientific, astrological, numerological, symbological tool. If you don't have all this color smacking you in the face and influencing you emotionally and putting, making you identify this way and that emotionally, you can be more objective about the cards. And that is another of the signatures of the Alexandrian school, is that this is a science. See, with the Hebrew, this is your spiritual life. This is your relationship with God. With the Alexandrian Iamblican strain, this is your self-cultivation. It's a really different thought form. In the Hebrew thought form, we are all subject to the, whim or divine plan of the Great Father, who you absolutely submit to. And so, as if you were to read the Sefer Yetzirah, you would get many instructions for humbling yourself and becoming cooperative, and learning to get more intuitive for the sake of being a good follower of this ancient model. The Alexandrian, or the Iamblican approach, is more about self-cultivation, not to refer you to some outside heaven, but to put you into your own divinity as you stand. So if I was going to say there's a flavor difference between these two ancient decks, it would be one's more traditionally religious, although I tell you it's a wild and fabulous deck, and I would not for a minute want anybody to look down on it, because it's very magical. Hebrew Kabbalah magic is all chakras and moving energy and producing effects in the world. This is provides very strict and forward instructions for cultivating yourself. But the goal of cultivating yourself in the Hebrew model is a little different than the goal of cultivating yourself in this Alexandrian mixed culture model, where they're more sort of playing with it. They take the revelation supposedly fixed from the time of Abraham, and they switch some things around, They're interpreting it a little bit differently. There's a shift here. And we have to remember there is precedent for the Hebrew and the Egyptian cultures merging. That's in the personality of Moses, who was raised in the Egyptian courts and actually was a culture hero to both the Hebrews and the Egyptians. So that's, what was he? He was 800 BC. So again, this is a very rich, old groundwork we're laying, even though these tarot cards, especially this colored one here, is from this century. These older ones are reflecting a previous century's usage. Now the third strain in the ancient tarot is these alchemical images. And this also is a modern deck called the Alchemical Tarot, but the pictures are all taken from 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th century manuscripts. And you can actually see them. Here's one. This book is full of great stuff.
What is the book?
It's called Alchemy by Johannes Fabricius, and has a tremendous treasure trove of images, some of which we're definitely going to be using. But why I brought this out was to just show you the imagery that we now associate with tarot right here before tarot was ever printed as cards. Here's one that's just especially a triple header, so I always like to point it out. We're in the landscape of the moon card, and here's the hermit following the world. All three of them in the same image. We see all kinds. We've got magus after magus in the form of Hermes, and we have the Virgin of the World, all different ways. And as a matter of fact, here's one of those lovely astrological cosmos. The whole Babylonian model and at the center is the world of the four elements, and then we have the planets circling around, and then we have the three heavens, and it's all just as orderly as can be according to this traditional Kabbalistic Babylonian astrology that we've been working with, that set our clocks and set our calendars 2100 years BC. We are still calling the days of the week by the Babylonian names, and figuring out our days, weeks, and months with the same model. This is at the foundation, way pre-Christian history, at the bedrock of our collective psyche. And here it's all linked. The lower world and the higher world are linked by the divine goddess. And this is something that we need to understand, is both in the Alexandrian Egyptian strain and in the Hebrew strain, we already see evidence of this wonderful Grail mythos. The Virgin of the world's soul, and the Holy Grail, and the pouring out of the divine substance onto humans, and us nourishing ourselves from this so that we can grow up into godlets of our own and transcend the cosmos and become fused with the greater being. So that's one of the reasons why the church was so down on the tarot every time any little evidence of it or any of these images would come up, because it's all goddess worship from ancient times, clothed in these art of memory images and these mythological images and astrological images. And of course they didn't go away. They're actually all over the architecture of Europe, all over the churches. There was no way to make it go away, because it's so firmly embedded into the foundation of language and culture and calendar and time. Everything we understand about the shape and the rhythm of life, we use these tools of number and letter to discern. Now we use these correspondences that were set so long ago. And we don't even know anymore that the names of the days are the planets, and that there are images associated with these. Actually, there's one I opened up and I guess I changed it. Oh no, here it is. They had, in the Dark Ages and into the Renaissance, they had these images that were called the children of the planets. And each image, this one is the children of the moon, so these are all people engaged in all the activities thought of as lunar. And the symbolism of Cancer on her chariot, she's riding through this landscape where there's fishermen fishing and swimming, and boaters and gamblers, and all the people that were ruled by lunar types of sentiments. And these books would go around, and you would see each page would be the children of Venus, the children of Mars, the children of Jupiter. And this was all going around along with their Bibles, what they had of them, and their old histories, because this was just part of ancient culture that they were preserving. So anyway, this lovely alchemical deck has copied these images and plopped them on the cards to remind us yet again how we have kept these arcana, these core ideas, these archetypes, circulating in the collective mind even during the repressions of the church. And so again, just to repeat myself, it was in the alchemical books, in the architecture, and embedded in the language that these arcana continued coming forward despite all the cultural opposition and wars and etc. So now we're coming into a time where we are beginning to have access to the new resource of publishing, movable type, and fast reproductions. How are we doing for tape? Still going. Now, this is the Montaigne Tarot, and I should find my little historical slip of paper so I can quote it to you. Is that it? Thank you. Okay. Heading from the 13th century to the 14th century, we see a tradition growing in Italy that is reflected in art and eventually becomes the physical tarot cards as we know them. And these were called the Triumphi. Many cities, especially in Italy, but also in France and a little bit in Spain, they would have parades just like we had our Eugene Celebration Parade. Only the floats would be these arcana. This tarot came out, and it really wasn't a tarot because it's a set of pages in a book. This one was published in 1465. In it, you will see images that later were distilled out to become tarot cards. What you have is an ordered universe. Remember that image I was just showing you with the woman in the middle and the terrestrial realm and then the rings of the planets going out? Well, here's 5 layers in the creation. From the terrestrial, the stations of man is the bottom 10. Through, these are the liberal arts, the next one up. The next one up from here. Oh no, these are the muses, I'm sorry. The second row up is the muses, just above the stations of man, the human occupations. The one up from that is the liberal arts. These are, remember, you'd be studying these and installing them in your memory castle. If you were a hermetically educated or a Renaissance educated person, you would have studied all of these liberal arts, and you would have a wing of your castle dedicated to what you had learned. And so these are the ruling mythical figures of those realms. And you can see how then, if these are the muses, they correspond to the liberal arts, and they correspond to the stations of man as well, as these things are columnar as well as linear. The next station up is let's see.
They look like virtues.
These are the virtues, yes. 7 virtues and 3 states of time. And so the 7 virtues, of course, would be associated with these 7 planets, because we see across the top are the planets. And the moon and Mercury and Venus are corresponded to those 3 different states of time. One of them is the state of sunrise and also birth of spring. Another one is the state of sunset, the coming of the dark. And then a third one is, I think, some kind of like timeless flow sense of the bigger picture. I'd have to go back to do my homework to fully discern that, because they're using an idiom from the 1400s in naming them, and so linguists have to argue about what it means. Anyway, so at the top then we see the 10 circles, the 7 planets out to Saturn, and then the 3 outer rings that we saw as 3 rings of stars. The 8th sphere, which they imagined was like a plastic bubble over the top of the Earth and contained all the stars that we now identify with deep space. Then the Primum Mobile, which is the invisible rotating sphere outside of that they envisioned turning all these at smaller wheels. And then the Prima Causa, the first cause, which again has that model. And look, they even have the asteroid belt in there, or the starry heavens. So this was never meant to be tarot, but a number of the images have survived to become tarot. For example, in the stations of man, here we have the very highest station. They call it the Pope. It's a woman. Now, if that's not a Gnostic carryover, I don't know what is.
Papa.
That is so fabulously female. There's just no way around it. Yeah, she's the Papa. It's great. And we have the modern day gentleman there in the Zintlomo.
Looks like the page of...
Oh, yeah, he does. He looks like he could be one of the pages, doesn't he? Yeah. And then, of course, Misery down there at the very lowest bottom of the ladder, Mr. Misery. He sometimes shows up on later images as the Fool. But let's see, what other archetypes do we recognize here? Here's the Justice card right there. There's the old Strength card with the pillar and the lion. She also got on lion armor. Here's the Prudence card, which we see later on the premier Gnostic tarot of the French Renaissance. There's Temperance. So you see a number of these things carried over. This could be the Chariot. Venus is definitely a Venus rising from the waters. I mean, that's a super classic image that you see on the later Gnostic deck as Eve. So anyway, this is called the Montaigne Tarot, and the things that I found, the best information I found on this deck, I found in an art history book called The Survival of the Pagan Gods by Jean Sesnick. And it's a wonderful old text that I've found quoted in other scholarly works, so I figure not only is it respectable, but it might still be in print. Along similar parallel timing to the printing of this Montaigne Tarot, the Sforza deck, which I don't know how to, Sforza, I guess, how to say it, but this is a book. I don't own a copy of that deck because there's too much gold leaf involved and excess expense, and it's not an esoteric tarot. It doesn't have any of these correspondences. But this is one of the earliest set tarot decks that looks like what we're used to now in tarot, and it again is connected with this idea of the floats of the triumphi, the city pageants, where the people would show off their wealth and their educations by creating these wonderful displays of the different signs and planets and, you know, all these different art of memory images that were their cast of characters for the mythic archetypes. Okay, does anybody want a little break to unbend their knees and stand up and stuff? No, you're all tough. All right. Now this next one I don't own either. It is in circulation in Europe. These were Xerox. This is some cards I got my hands on. This is the Maitelli Tarot. And it was published in 1664, so this is like a couple hundred years later. And yet these images have not mutated too far from the Montaigne. Some interesting parallels are, let's see, there's the Chariot card. It has transformed from a male to a female. Strength card still has the pillar. The Hermit is actually a wounded angel, a wounded elderly angel.